The Valori Collective had watched the stars for 600,000 years, and in that time, they had found over 12,000 species that could travel between worlds. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had witnessed the birth of new civilizations and the death of old ones. And they had learned one simple truth above all others. The galaxy was full of patterns that repeated themselves over and over again. Senior analyst Kethra knew these patterns better than most. She had spent 3 centuries studying new species as they took their first steps into the wider universe, and she could predict with remarkable accuracy how each one would develop. The aggressive ones would burn themselves out within a few thousand years. The passive ones would be absorbed by stronger neighbors. And the clever ones would find their place in the collective's carefully ordered hierarchy. When her superior called her into his office and assigned her a new case, she expected nothing unusual. Another primitive species had been detected in an uncharted region of space, broadcasting crude radio signals into the void like a child shouting into the darkness. They call themselves humans, Director Morvath told her, sliding a data tablet across his desk. They achieved faster than light travel approximately 60 of their years ago, which makes them one of the youngest spacefaring species we have ever encountered. Kethra picked up the tablet and scrolled through the preliminary data. The information was sparse. The humans came from a small planet in an unremarkable solar system. They had colonized a handful of nearby worlds, and they had recently begun exploring beyond their local cluster. Nothing about them suggested they were anything special. I assume this is a standard observation and classification assignment, she said, already planning how she would structure her report. It was, Morvath replied, and something in his tone made Kethra look up. Until yesterday, when one of their ships arrived at Nexus Station, requesting formal contact with the collective, this was unusual. Most species waited to be contacted by the Valori, understanding instinctively that approaching such an ancient and powerful civilization uninvited was a risk. The fact that the humans had come to them suggested either remarkable confidence or remarkable ignorance. What do we know about their vessel? Kethra asked. Very little so far. Our initial scans show a ship of crude construction, angular hull plating, exposed conduit systems, and what appears to be significant damage from their journey. They barely made it to the station before their engines failed completely. Kethra felt a small surge of pity. These humans had pushed their primitive technology to its absolute limits just to reach Valori space, and now they sat helpless at the edge of civilization, hoping for a kind welcome. It was almost touching in its desperation. I will go to the station immediately, she said, standing and tucking the tablet under her arm. A species bold enough to make such a journey deserves a proper greeting. The journey to Nexus Station took only a few hours, and Kethra spent most of that time reviewing everything the collective knew about humans. The information painted a picture of a young and struggling species they had only discovered. They were not alone in the universe a century ago. Their government was fragmented into dozens of competing factions, and their technology was generations behind even the most basic collective standards by the time her shuttle docked at the station. Kethra had already begun drafting her classification recommendation. The humans would likely fall somewhere between Tier 7 and Tier 6, primitive enough to require guidance, but advanced enough to be useful as junior members of the collective. It was a generous assessment given their apparent limitations. The human ship was visible through the observation deck windows, and Kethra stopped to study it before proceeding to the diplomatic chambers. It was even uglier than she had expected, a blocky vessel covered in welded plates and scarred armor. Its hull blackened by what looked like weapons fire or perhaps just the stress of pushing through space at speeds it was never designed to handle. Vapor leaked from several joints, and the entire structure seemed to groan under its own weight. Remarkable that it flies at all, said a voice beside her. And Kethra turned to find Station Commander Veth watching the vessel with the same mixture of curiosity and pity that she felt. "They must be very brave," Kethra replied. "Or very desperate, perhaps both. I have met with their captain, a female named Chun. She seems calm and reasonable, though I suspect she is hiding how frightened she truly is. Her crew is small, only 40 individuals, and they have been traveling for nearly 2 years to reach us. 2 years in that broken ship," Kethra thought, shaking her head in amazement. The Valari could cross the same distance in a matter of days. But these humans had crawled across the void inch by painful inch, never knowing if they would arrive or simply vanish into the endless dark. "Has she made any demands?" Kethra asked. "None. She has asked only for the opportunity to speak with our leaders and to learn about the collective. She offered to submit to any protocols we require, including a full technological exchange assessment." This surprised Kethra. Most species were protective of their technology, fearful that revealing too much would leave them vulnerable. The humans were either very trusting or very confident that they had nothing worth stealing. "I will conduct the assessment personally," Kethra decided. "Please arrange a meeting with Captain Chun and inform Director Morveth that I will have my preliminary report ready within 3 days." The diplomatic chamber was a grand space designed to impress visiting species with the power and majesty of the Valori collective. Towering columns of living crystal rose toward a ceiling that displayed a real-time map of collective territory, and the floor was made of polished stone that had been quarried from the Valori homeworld itself. Captain Sarah Chun stood in the center of this magnificence, and she looked remarkably small. She was shorter than Kethra had expected, with dark hair pulled back from her round face and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with quiet intensity. Her uniform was plain and functional, marked only by a simple insignia that Kethra did not recognize. "Senior Analyst Kethra," Chun said, offering what appeared to be a gesture of greeting. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. We have traveled a very long way, and we are honored to finally speak with representatives of the collective." Her voice was calm and steady, and Kethra found herself revising her initial impression. This was not a frightened woman hiding her fear. This was someone who had faced the void for 2 years and emerged with her composure intact. Perhaps the humans were more resilient than their crude technology suggested. "The honor is ours," Kethra replied, following diplomatic protocol. "The collective welcomes all who seek peaceful contact. I understand you have agreed to a technological exchange assessment." "We have. My engineers will provide full access to our ship systems, and we will answer any questions your scientists may have. We believe that openness is the foundation of trust, and we hope to build trust with the collective." It was a pretty speech, Kethra thought, and probably rehearsed many times during the long journey. Still, she appreciated the sentiment, and she found herself hoping that the humans would prove worthy of the collective's friendship. "Then let us begin," she said, gesturing toward the door that led to the analysis chambers. "I am sure we have much to learn from each other." As she led Captain Chun through the corridors of the station, Kethra felt a small flutter of excitement. New species were always interesting, even the primitive ones, and there was something about these humans that intrigued her. Perhaps it was their boldness or their apparent honesty, or simply the mystery of how such a young species had managed to reach Valori space at all. She had no way of knowing that within a few days. That small flutter of excitement would transform into something much more powerful, a combination of shock and fear and reluctant admiration that would change the way the entire collective thought about the universe and their place in it. The humans had arrived, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The analysis began the following morning, and Director Morveth assembled his finest team of scientists to conduct the work. 12 specialists in various fields gathered in the main research bay, their instruments ready and their expectations low. This was routine work for them. They had examined hundreds of primitive vessels over the centuries, and they expected the human ship to be no different. Morv himself supervised the operation from a raised platform overlooking the bay. He was old even by Valori standards, with faded scales and eyes that had seen more than most beings could imagine. And he approached the task with the bored confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. "We will begin with their defensive systems," he announced to his team. "Scan the exterior weapons arrays and prepare a full report on their capabilities. I want preliminary data within 2 hours." The scientists set to work, their instruments humming as they probed the ugly human vessel. Kethra stood beside Morvath, watching the data streams flow across multiple screens and trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The first readings came from the small turrets positioned across the ship's hull, hundreds of them, arranged in overlapping fields of fire that covered virtually every angle of approach. The humans had called these their point defense systems, explaining that they were designed to shoot down incoming missiles and debris. "Kinetic weapons," one of the scientists reported, her voice carrying a note of amusement. "They fire physical projectiles." "How quaint," Morvath nodded, unsurprised. Kinetic weapons were ancient technology, abandoned by most advanced species hundreds of thousands of years ago in favor of directed energy and plasma systems. The fact that humans still use them confirmed what everyone already suspected. They were primitive, barely worthy of classification above Tier 7. "Continue the scan," Morvath ordered. "Record the projectile composition and muzzle velocity for the archive." The scientist adjusted her instruments, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Then she made a sound that Kethra had never heard before, a kind of choking gasp that seemed caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. "Director," the scientist said, her voice suddenly very small. "There appears to be an error in my equipment. The velocity readings cannot be correct." "What do the readings show?" Morvath asked, finally showing a flicker of interest. "They show that the projectiles accelerate to 12% of light speed within the weapon barrel." Silence fell over the research bay like a physical weight. 12% of light speed was not possible for kinetic weapons. The heat generation alone would melt any known material, and the energy requirements would drain a ship's power systems in seconds. It was simply not done, not by any species the collective had ever encountered. "Run the scan again," Morvath ordered. And now there was tension in his voice that had not been there before. The scientist ran the scan again, and again, and again. Each time the results came back the same. The human point defense turrets fired small projectiles at 12% of the speed of light, fast enough to cross the distance between ships in the blink of an eye, fast enough to be nearly impossible to dodge or intercept. Morvath descended from his platform and approached the main display screen, his cranial fins flattening against his skull in a gesture of extreme distress. Kethra had worked with him for decades, and had never seen him react this way to anything. "Analyze the projectile composition," he said quietly. The data appeared on the screen. The projectiles were made of an osmium tungsten alloy wrapped around a core of depleted uranium, a combination that maximized both density and penetrating power. At the velocities the weapons achieved, each tiny projectile would carry the kinetic energy of a small nuclear explosion. "They have 6,000 of these turrets," Kethra heard herself say, her voice sounding strange and distant in her own ears. 6,000, and they call them point defense, weapons for shooting down missiles. Morvath said nothing. He simply stared at the screen, as if hoping the numbers would change if he looked at them long enough. "Director," another scientist spoke up, and there was real fear in his voice now. "Should we continue to the main battery analysis?" The main batteries were the large weapons mounted along the ship's spine, the ones Captain Chum had described as a bit outdated when giving them the tour. If the point defense systems were this powerful, what would the main weapons show? Continue, Morvis said, though he looked like a man walking toward his own execution. The scan took only a few minutes, and when the results appeared on the screen, several of the scientists made sounds of distress. One actually backed away from her station, as if the data itself might harm her. Main batteries fired projectiles at 31% of light speed. 31%. Nearly a third of the fastest speed possible in the universe, achieved by chunks of metal fired from weapons that the humans considered obsolete. At that velocity, the projectiles would cross the effective combat range of most Valori weapons in less than a second. Far too fast to track or evade. This is impossible, one of the scientists whispered. No species develops kinetic weapons to this level. The energy requirements alone would make directed energy far more efficient. And yet here they are, Morvith replied, his voice hollow. The humans did not take the efficient path. They took the brutal one. Kethra thought about what she had seen of the human ship. Its ugly construction, its bolted plates and exposed systems, its complete lack of elegance. She had assumed this was a sign of primitive technology, but now she wondered if it was something else entirely. Perhaps the humans did not care about elegance because they cared only about results. We need to see the rest of their weapons, she said. And even as the words left her mouth, she was not sure she wanted to know what else the humans had created. The analysis continued through the day and into the night. And with each new discovery, the mood in the research bay grew darker. The humans had missile systems that carried multiple warheads, each capable of independent targeting. Destroy the main missile, and you simply created a dozen smaller threats. They had something called torpedo tubes that fired weapons designed to bore through armor before detonating inside the target. They had close-range weapons called flak cannons that filled entire regions of space with shrapnel. Everything was designed to kill. And everything was designed to kill in multiple ways. There was no subtlety, no elegance, no consideration for anything except raw destructive power. I need to speak with Captain Chun, Morvith said finally, as the station's artificial night cycle began. I need to understand how this is possible. He found her in the diplomatic quarters assigned to the human delegation, sitting alone at a small table and reading something on a portable device. She looked up when he entered and smiled warmly, apparently unaware of the crisis her ship had caused. Director Morvith, she said, rising to greet him. I hope the analysis is going well. My engineers said your scientists had some questions about our power systems. Morvith stared at her for a long moment, trying to reconcile the pleasant woman before him with the terrible weapons she commanded. Captain Chun, he said slowly. Your point defense systems fire projectiles at 12% of light speed. Your main batteries fire at 31%. These are speeds that our own weapons cannot achieve. How is this possible? Chun's expression shifted, and for a moment, Morvith saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not pride exactly, but perhaps a kind of weary acknowledgement. We had a lot of practice, she said quietly. We've been fighting for a very long time. Fighting whom? Morvith asked. Captain Chen looked at him. And in her eyes, he saw the weight of centuries of conflict, of wars that had nearly consumed her entire species, of weapons built in desperation and refined through endless bloodshed. Each other, she said simply. We've been fighting each other. Morvith felt something cold settle in his chest. These weapons, these impossible, terrible weapons, had not been designed to fight aliens or conquer other worlds. They had been designed by humans to kill other humans, and they had been perfected over generations of conflict that most species would not have survived. The weapons on this ship, Chung continued, her voice steady. They are from a decommissioned vessel, 50 years old by our standards. Our current military ships carry significantly more advanced systems, more advanced. Morvith thought, and for the first time in 2 centuries, he felt genuine fear. The humans had arrived at the collective's doorstep in a broken-down ship carrying obsolete weapons. And those obsolete weapons were more powerful than anything the Valori had ever created. What would happen when they came back with something new? The days that followed were filled with discoveries that shook the foundations of everything the Valori believed about technological development. And with each new revelation, the scientists grew more quiet and more afraid. Morvath had ordered a complete analysis of the human ship, leaving nothing unexamined, and his team worked around the clock to catalog every system and every component. What they found painted a picture of a species unlike any the collective had ever encountered. The power systems were the first shock after the weapons. Most advanced civilizations use fusion reactors or quantum energy collectors, clean and efficient systems that have been refined over millions of years. The humans used these as well, but they also had something else: nuclear fission reactors, devices that split atoms apart to generate power. This technology is inherently dangerous, analyst Yeth reported, her voice tight with disbelief. The reaction produces radiation that is harmful to organic life, and the fuel itself remains toxic for thousands of years. No rational species would continue using such systems once alternatives became available. And yet the humans have been running them continuously for over a century, Morvath noted, reviewing the ship's maintenance logs. They put these reactors in vehicles that travel beneath their oceans, in vessels that carry hundreds of crew members. They live alongside the radiation and simply accept the risk. It was madness by Valori standards, a willingness to embrace danger that bordered on self-destruction. But as Morvath studied the data further, he began to understand that this was not madness at all. It was simply the human way. The humans did not wait for safe solutions. They used what worked and dealt with the consequences later. They did not optimize for elegance or efficiency. They optimized for results, no matter the cost. This philosophy extended to every system on the ship. The engines were powerful, but prone to failure, requiring constant maintenance by a crew that worked in shifts around the clock. The life support systems had multiple redundancies because the primary systems failed so often. Even the hull plating showed signs of repeated repair, patches welded over patches in a patchwork that should have fallen apart long ago. They keep everything running through sheer determination, Yeth observed. Their technology breaks constantly, but they simply fix it and continue. They never stop. They never give up. Morvath thought about the 2-year journey the humans had made to reach Nexus Station, crossing vast distances in a ship that was falling apart around them. Any other species would have turned back, would have accepted that the journey was too dangerous. The humans had simply kept going, but it was the historical archives that truly frightened him. Captain Chun had granted full access to the ship's database as part of the technological exchange. And buried within that database was the complete history of human weapons development. Morvath spent 3 days reading through it, and by the end he could barely look at the human delegation without shuddering. The humans had discovered nuclear fission less than 200 years ago, and within 5 years they had used it to build weapons. Not just any weapons, bombs capable of destroying entire cities in a single flash of light and heat. They had dropped 2 of these bombs on their own planet, killing hundreds of thousands of their own kind. And the war had ended, but it had not stopped there in the decades that followed. The humans had built more nuclear weapons, bigger nuclear weapons, weapons that could be launched from the ground or dropped from aircraft or fired from ships or submarines. They had developed missiles that could carry these weapons across entire oceans in minutes, striking targets on the other side of their world with unstoppable force at their peak. Morvath reported to the collective's emergency council. The humans possessed over 50,000 nuclear warheads. Each one was capable of destroying a city, and together they could have sterilized their planet many times over. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had heard of species that destroyed themselves through war, but they had never encountered one that had built the tools for its own extinction and then simply continued living with those tools pointed at each other. Surely, this is an exaggeration, Councillor Veth said. No species could survive such conditions. They not only survived, Morveth replied. They thrived. Even at the height of their nuclear standoff, they continued to advance, to build, to explore. They went to their moon. They sent probes to other planets. They dreamed of the stars while sitting on enough weapons to end their own existence. He pulled up an image from the human database, a map of their planet showing the locations of nuclear missile silos, bomber bases, and submarine patrol routes. The entire world was covered in a web of potential destruction, and yet the humans had lived their daily lives as if this was simply normal. They called it mutually assured destruction. Morveth continued. The theory was simple. If both sides in a conflict possessed enough weapons to destroy the other completely, then neither side would dare to strike first. Peace through the threat of total annihilation. That is insanity, another counselor whispered. Perhaps. But it worked. The humans never used their weapons against each other after those first two bombs. They negotiated, they reduced their arsenals, and eventually they began to look outward rather than inward. The species that should have destroyed itself instead reached for the stars. Kethra, who had been listening quietly from her position near the back of the chamber, finally spoke up. Director, what happened to those weapons? Does humanity still possess them? Morveth hesitated before answering. This was the part of the report he had dreaded most. They reduced their numbers significantly, he said. But yes, they still have several thousand nuclear warheads spread across their homeworld and colonies. They are kept in storage, maintained and ready, waiting for a threat that they hope will never come. The chamber fell silent. The Valori had maintained peace across the galaxy through careful diplomacy and overwhelming technological superiority. They had never imagined that a species might achieve peace through the threat of mutual extinction. There is more, Morveth said, and he could see the counselors brace themselves. The weapons on their ship, the railguns and missiles that we have analyzed, these were developed after the nuclear standoff, designed for conflict in space. They are not nuclear weapons, but they carry similar destructive potential. He showed them the calculations. A single volley from the human ship's main batteries could destroy a Valori cruiser, and the point defense systems could create a wall of death that no missile or fighter could penetrate. The ship that had limped into Nexus Station, broken and barely functional, was capable of taking on multiple collective vessels and winning. How is this possible? Councillor Veth demanded. How can such a primitive species create weapons that rival our own? They are not as primitive as we believed, Kethra answered. They simply developed differently. We optimized for efficiency and elegance. They optimized for survival at any cost. She stepped forward, bringing up her own analysis on the main display. The humans evolved on a world that tried to kill them at every turn. She explained. High gravity, toxic atmosphere, extreme temperatures, predators, diseases, natural disasters. Their planet is what we would classify as a death world. To survive there, they had to become adaptable, resilient, and, above all, competitive. They competed with their environment, she continued. And when they conquered that, they competed with each other. War is not an aberration for humans. It is a constant throughout their entire history. They have been fighting since before they developed writing, and they have never stopped. This competition drove their technology forward at an incredible pace. While other species took thousands of years to develop new weapons, the humans did it in decades. They could not afford to wait. Their enemies would not wait, so neither could they. Morveth nodded slowly. He had reached the same conclusion after days of study. The weapons on their ship are terrifying, he admitted. but they are also a testament to human resilience. These are people who stood on the edge of extinction and chose to survive. They built weapons capable of destroying everything, and then they chose not to use them. That restraint, Kethra added, may be the most remarkable thing about them. They had the power to conquer, to destroy, to dominate, and they came to us asking for friendship instead. The council members looked at each other, uncertainty clear on their faces. The Valari had never encountered a species like this, one that combined terrible power with apparent peaceful intent. What do we do? Councillor Veth asked. How do we classify them? Morva thought about the human ship, about Captain Chun's calm smile, about the weapons that could challenge collective dominance and the nuclear arsenal that still waited back on Earth. I do not know, he admitted, but I think we need to be very careful about how we answer that question. The classification committee met in emergency session for 4 consecutive days, and the debates that took place within those chambers were unlike anything the Valori had experienced in living memory. The committee was composed of the collective's most senior scholars, experts in technology, sociology, military science, and interspecies relations. Together, they had classified thousands of new species over the centuries. Assigning each one a tier determined its place in the galactic hierarchy. The system had worked flawlessly for 600,000 years now. It was breaking down. The humans cannot be classified using our standard methodology, declared senior classifier Koroth, slamming his hand against the table in frustration. Their technology does not fit any existing tier. Their social development contradicts every model we have. They are an anomaly. Then we create a new classification, suggested another committee member. We adjust our models to accommodate their unique circumstances. How? Koroth demanded. They have weapons that exceed Tier 2 capabilities, but their medical technology is barely Tier 5. Their space travel is Tier 4 at best, but their computational systems approach Tier 3. They are advanced and primitive at the same time. How do we classify that? Kethra sat in the observer section, watching the debate with growing fascination. She had spent the past several days studying the human delegation, learning everything she could about their history and culture. And she was beginning to understand something that the committee had not yet grasped. The humans did not develop the way other species developed because the humans were not like other species. They had been forged in fire, shaped by endless conflict, and they had emerged from that crucible as something the galaxy had never seen before. Perhaps we are approaching this incorrectly, she said, and the committee turned to look at her. Perhaps the question is not what tier the humans belong to, but whether our tier system can accommodate them at all. Koroth made a dismissive gesture. The tier system has worked for 600,000 years. It has brought order and stability to the entire galaxy. Are you suggesting we abandon it because of one unusual species? I am suggesting that one unusual species may require an unusual response, Kethra replied calmly. Consider what we have learned about them. They evolved on a death world. They survived constant warfare. They built weapons capable of destroying their own civilization and then chose not to use them. These are not the actions of a species that fits neatly into any category. Director Morveth, who had been silent throughout most of the debate, finally spoke up. Analyst Kethra raises a valid point, he said. The humans did not follow the normal path of development. They compressed what should have been millions of years of progress into mere centuries, driven by desperation and competition. They are not primitive. They are simply different. Different how? Koroth asked. His tone skeptical. Mervith considered the question carefully before answering. Most species develop technology to solve problems, he said. They encounter a challenge, they find a solution, and they move on. The process is gradual and methodical. The humans do not work this way. For humans, every problem is a potential threat, and every threat requires not just a solution but overwhelming force. They do not build weapons to match their enemies. They build weapons to destroy their enemies completely. They do not seek balance. They seek dominance. That sounds dangerous, Korath observed. It is extremely dangerous, Morvath agreed. But it is also remarkably effective. The humans achieved in decades what took other species millennia. Their weapons technology in particular advanced at a pace that should have been impossible. Kethra added her own observations. Their social structure reinforces this pattern. Humans are organized into competing groups, nations, corporations, ideological factions that constantly try to outperform each other. This competition drives innovation at an incredible rate. When one group develops a new weapon, the others immediately work to develop something better. It is a cycle of escalation that should have destroyed them. She continued. And it nearly did, many times. But each time they pull back from the brink, learn from their mistakes, and continue forward. They are survivors above all else. The committee absorbed this information in silence. The picture that was emerging was both terrifying and impressive. A species that had turned the chaos of constant conflict into a driving force for advancement. But they came to us in peace, one committee member pointed out. Their weapons are terrible, but they have not used them against us. Does that not suggest they can be trusted? It suggests they want to be trusted, Korath replied. That is not the same thing. They may simply be waiting for the right moment to strike. Kethra shook her head. I have spent time with their captain and crew. I have studied their history and their culture. I do not believe they came here to conquer. Then why did they come? Korath demanded. What do they want? I think they want what every species wants, Kethra said softly. A place in the universe. A sense of belonging. The knowledge that they are not alone. They have been fighting for their entire existence, fighting their environment, fighting each other, fighting for survival against odds that should have killed them 1,000 times over. Now they have finally reached the stars, and they have discovered that the universe is filled with other species, other civilizations, other ways of being. They came to us because they are tired of fighting, she concluded. They came because they want to find another path. The chamber was quiet as the committee considered her words. Morvath broke the silence. There is another factor to consider, he said. The humans have made no demands, issued no threats, and shared their technology willingly. They have followed every protocol we have established and cooperated with every request we have made. If they wanted to intimidate us, they could have. Their weapons are powerful enough to challenge our defenses. Instead, they have behaved like guests hoping to make a good impression. That tells us something about their intentions. Korath was still not convinced. Or it tells us they are clever enough to hide their true intentions. We cannot simply trust them because they have been polite. No, Morvath agreed. But we can acknowledge that their actions so far have been peaceful, and we can respond accordingly. The debate continued for several more hours, with arguments flying back and forth across the chamber. Some committee members wanted to classify the humans as a potential threat and treat them with caution. Others wanted to welcome them as allies and begin a formal partnership. Still others wanted to wait and observe, gathering more data before making any decisions. Finally, the High Counselor called for order. She was ancient even by Valori standards. Her scales faded to silver and her eyes clouded with age. But her mind was still sharp. We have debated long enough, she said. The humans are waiting for our response, and we owe them an answer. Based on everything I have heard, I do not believe we can classify this species using our standard system. They are too different, too unpredictable, too powerful. Any tier we assign them would be meaningless. Therefore, I propose that we do something we have never done before in 600,000 years of collective history. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the chamber. I propose that we offer the humans partnership as equals. The reaction was immediate. Gasps of shock from some, murmurs of approval from others, and stunned silence from most. The Valori had never considered any species their equal. They were the oldest and most advanced civilization in the known galaxy, the founders and leaders of the collective. This is unprecedented, Koroth protested. We cannot simply abandon our principles because one species has impressive weapons. We are not abandoning our principles, the High Counselor replied. We are adapting them to meet a new reality. The humans have shown us that the universe is stranger than we imagined, and that our assumptions about how civilizations develop may not be universal. If we try to force them into our hierarchy, we risk making enemies of a species that has already shown it can survive anything. If we welcome them as partners, we may gain the most valuable ally the collective has ever known. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each committee member in turn. The choice is ours to make. I have given you my recommendation. Now we must decide together. The vote took place the following morning, and when the results were announced, Kethra felt a surge of hope. The motion had passed. The humans would be offered partnership. The first species in collective history to be given such an honor. Now all that remained was to deliver the news, and to see how the humans would respond. The Grand Chamber of Nexus Station had been designed to inspire awe in visiting species, and it succeeded magnificently. The ceiling rose so high that it seemed to touch the stars themselves, and the walls were lined with crystalline structures that pulsed with soft light. At the center of the chamber, a raised platform held the seats of the collective's highest leaders, and around it stood representatives from dozens of member species. Captain Sarah Chun entered the chamber with her crew behind her, and Kethra watched from her position among the observers as the small group of humans made their way to the center of the vast space. They looked impossibly small against the grandeur of their surroundings, but they walked with steady confidence that suggested they were not. Intimidated, the High Counselor rose from her seat and addressed the gathered assembly. We are here today to witness a moment of historic significance, she announced, her voice carrying through the chamber. The Valori Collective has stood for 600,000 years, maintaining peace and order across the galaxy. In that time, we have welcomed thousands of species into our community, each one taking its place in the hierarchy that has served us so well. But today, we do something different. Today, we extend an offer that has never been made before in all the long history of our collective. She turned to face Captain Chun directly. Captain, your species has surprised us. When you arrived at our station in your damaged vessel, we expected to find a primitive civilization struggling to take its first steps into the wider universe. Instead, we found something far more remarkable. Your technology confounds our classification systems. Your weapons exceed what we believe possible for a species of your age. Your history reveals a people who have faced extinction many times and survived through sheer determination. You are unlike anything we have ever encountered. Chun stood perfectly still, her expression calm and attentive. Her crew shifted nervously behind her, clearly aware that the next few moments would determine the fate of their entire species. We cannot classify you, the High Counselor continued. Our tiers do not accommodate what you are. We cannot place you in our hierarchy because you do not fit within it. Therefore, the Valori Collective offers you something new, not membership as subordinates, not classification as primitives, but partnership as equals. A murmur ran through the chamber. The representatives of other species exchanged glances of surprise and confusion. This had never happened before, and the implications were staggering. Chen was quiet for a long moment, and Kethra found herself holding her breath. The offer was unprecedented, but it was also a test. How the humans responded would reveal much about their true intentions. High Counselor, Chen said finally, her voice steady. I am honored by your offer, and I confess I am somewhat surprised. We came here hoping for friendship, but we did not expect to be treated as equals by a civilization as ancient and accomplished as yours. You have seen our weapons, she continued. You have studied our history and learned about the wars we have fought and the terrible things we have done to each other. I would understand if you feared us, if you wanted to keep us at a distance. We do not fear what you have done, the High Counselor replied. We are impressed by what you have overcome. Your species stood on the edge of annihilation and chose to survive. You built weapons capable of destroying everything and chose to seek peace instead. That restraint speaks louder than any weapon, Chun nodded slowly. Then I accept your offer, High Counselor, on behalf of humanity. We will be your partners, your allies, and your friends. We will share what we have learned and learn from what you share in return. And we will work together to build a future that benefits all species. There is one thing I must say, however, she added, and her voice took on a more serious tone. We have been fighting for a very long time, and that fighting has shaped us in ways that cannot be easily changed. We are competitive, we are aggressive, and we sometimes act before we think. We will try to be good partners, but we will not always succeed. If we make mistakes, we ask for your patience. If we offend, we ask for your forgiveness. We are not perfect, but we are sincere, and we will always try to do better. The High Counselor smiled, a rare expression for a Valori, but one that seemed appropriate for the moment. Perfection is not required, she said. Growth is, and a species that can acknowledge its flaws and commit to improving is a species worth partnering with. She extended her hand in a gesture she had learned from studying human customs. Welcome to the collective, Captain Chun. May our partnership bring prosperity to both our peoples. Chum took her hand and shook it firmly. May it bring peace as well, she said. We have had enough of war. The ceremony that followed lasted several hours, with speeches and rituals and the formal signing of partnership documents. Kethra watched it all with a mixture of pride and wonder, knowing that she was witnessing something that would change the galaxy forever. When it was finally over and the delegations began to disperse, she made her way to an observation deck overlooking the docking bay where the human ship waited. She had expected to find it empty, but Captain Chun was already there, standing alone and looking out at the stars. May I join you? Kethra asked. Chun turned and smiled. Of course. I was hoping we might have a chance to talk before we leave. Kethra moved to stand beside her, and for a moment, they simply looked out at the vast darkness together. I have a question, Kethra said eventually. Something I have been wondering since I first saw your weapons. Ask, Chun replied. Your railguns, your missiles, your nuclear arsenal, you developed all of that to fight each other. And now you carry those weapons to the stars. Are you not afraid of what you might become? Chun was quiet for a long time before answering. Every day, she admitted. Every single day. She turned to face Kethra, and in her eyes, the analyst saw something ancient and weary. The weight of a species that had come so close to destroying itself so many times. We know what we are capable of, Chun said. We know the darkness that lives inside us, the violence and the hatred and the fear. We've seen what happens when we give in to those impulses, and we have sworn to never let it happen again. But that darkness does not go away simply because we wish it would. It is always there, waiting, whispering. The only way to keep it contained is to never forget that it exists. So yes, I am afraid. I am afraid of what we might become if we stop being careful. I am afraid of the weapons we carry and the power they represent. But that fear is what keeps us human. I do not understand, Kethra admitted. How can fear be a good thing? Chun smiled sadly. Because the moment we stop being afraid of what we could do, that is the moment we become the monsters we were always afraid of. The fear reminds us to be careful, to think before we act, to consider the consequences of our choices. We carry those weapons to make sure we never have to use them, she continued. And if we ever do have to use them, we want to be strong enough to win and wise enough to know the cost. Power without wisdom is just destruction. We learned that lesson the hard way. Kethra considered this for a long moment. It was a strange philosophy, born from a history of violence that she could barely imagine. But there was a kind of wisdom in it, the wisdom of a species that had stared into the abyss and found a way to step back from the edge. That is either the wisest thing I have ever heard, she said finally. Or the most terrifying, Chun laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that seemed to lighten the weight she carried. Yeah, she said. That is pretty much us in a nutshell. Wise and terrifying, hopeful and afraid, capable of the best and the worst. We are a contradiction, but we are trying to be better, and that is why you came here. Kethra realized. You came looking for a new path. We came looking for hope, Chun corrected. We wanted to know that the universe held something more than endless conflict. We wanted to believe that species could work together instead of destroying each other. She looked back out at the stars. Today you gave us that hope. You offered us partnership instead of fear, friendship instead of suspicion. You saw what we were capable of and chose to trust us anyway. That means more to us than you can possibly know. Kethra felt something shift inside her, a new understanding of these strange, impossible humans and the journey they had made to reach this moment. We are honored to have you as partners, she said. I believe we have much to learn from each other. I believe so too, Chun agreed. The galaxy is about to get very interesting. They stood together in comfortable silence. Two representatives of vastly different species, united by a shared hope for the future. Behind them, the human ship waited to begin its journey home. Carrying news that would change humanity forever, the Valori Collective had stood for 600,000 years. And in all that time, they had never met their equals. Now they had, and the galaxy would never be the same. The humans had arrived, and they had brought with them something more powerful than any weapon, the possibility of a future, built on partnership rather than dominance. On hope rather than fear it was, Kethra thought. A very human gift, complicated and contradictory and impossible to classify, and perhaps that was exactly what the galaxy needed.